C17, H19, NO3. Morphine, a very powerful drug, will help those in the hospital feel little to nothing during an operation. Its usage comes at the cost of addiction, though, and often withdrawal can lead you into depression. This only makes you want something to ease the pain of depression. Can I even begin to explain how desperate people are? Sometimes when we can't reach a state of euphoria, we persuade ourselves to believe that there is no point in being alive without those feelings. We feel numb. Elise woke up on the ground, scattering her eyes along the ceiling and noticing the one flimsy lamp hanging loosely from the center. She began to sit up and caught a glimpse of the wall in front of her, before rubbing her eyes and seeing the aged green walls surrounding her. "Where am I?" she said, still half asleep under her breath. She looked around the room to check for cameras or a way out, but sadly it was just a closed room. She stood up feeling nauseous and collapsed to the ground, as if she was hit in the back by an arrow. Elise breathed heavily on the cold linoleum floor, watching the moisture form and disappear with every inhale and exhale. She heard a sound like a latch being locked behind her. She slowly rolled over and pushed herself from the floor to see what it was. It was a metal door, and it had been locked from the other side. She heard another click and turned around again. That wasn't there before, she skeptically thought to herself. She crawled over it, struggling and slipping on the moisture from the breath on the floor. She pushed it open, feeling a cloud of fog touch her exposed ankles. A breeze gently through her hair behind her shoulders, like a delicate hand. Elise struggled to see in front of her, with her large gray eyes that remained in a state of attempted focus. She took a step forward, drawing in a breath of fog that felt like it was a wet scarf being jerked into her lungs. She coughed and stumbled forward into thinner air. She looked around at her surroundings and became puzzled. It looked like the neighborhood in Sacramento. There was the Safeway across the street, next to the laundromat with the Thrifties a block away. She stepped onto the street and felt that the pavement was dry and warm. Cars were scattered everywhere, like a broken plate on the ground. "Hello?" she called out, but there was no reply. "Can anyone hear me?" There was a rustle in the trees, yet there was no wind. "Please, I'm afraid," she confessed, looking at her feet. To the right of her was a hill that went upwards at a steep angle, and disappeared into a line of mist. To her left there was a juncture with two paths. She kept debating on what to do. Go up into the unknown, or down into another split decision. She stared at her feet. They were cold and bare, and the street wasn't warming them. She took one step forward, and her right foot and froze. She heard the sound of the river. "Funny," she said. "This part of the city is nowhere near the river. I must be hearing things." She rose her left foot up and put it down fast, feeling splashes of liquid settle onto her ankles and legs, while a pool of thick, warm liquid formed and enveloped the sole of her foot. She felt a shock of utter disgust shoot through her body, as tears formed in her eyes and started to slowly roll down her pale cheeks. She knew what was at her foot, but she fought with her curiosity to try and not look. She struggled with this for a few seconds, but finally looked down, forcing her neck to fold over and see the blood. A single stream of warm, flowing blood came running down the steep street towards her. It was diluted from the stream, coming down from the air to collide with the running fluid. She jolted backwards in a panic, whimpering under her breath. Elise looked up and saw the fog breaking up its density as a body came rolling down the hill. It pressed the blood on the ground like a steamroller and made a path as wide as the body itself. The corpse came to a stop on its stomach, 2 feet in front of Elise. She gagged as she kicked the back of his lifeless head and heard a crack in his neck. With hesitation, she flipped the heavy body over using her foot like a spatula from under his shoulder. The man was missing the skin off his face, more or less any detail or profile to say he had any one in the first place, and then the flesh above his heart was cleanly cut off, as if an operation had been done prior to his expulsion from the top of the hill. His neck was cut deep to the jugular, and his trachea was exposed, and it looked like it was dry, exposed to the air for some time. His fingers had no nails, and the skin was peeled off in a tapered fashion, getting thinner at the tips. His entire body was exposed, and his organs seemed to have never existed, but a great amount of skin was stretched from his pelvis to his rib cage, where it even sunk towards the lungs a little bit. Elise hyperventilated and felt her stomach start to churn. She grabbed her own face and kept her jaw up to keep her from screaming too loudly. She figured that, although mutilated, the man was still up the hill and would hear her if she'd screamed. She started to fall forwards, about to faint, and caught herself with her hands and elbows, scraping them harshly. Her hands hit the puddle violently, causing a huge splatter of blood to go over her shirt and her arms. She pushed herself up and backed away, finding a stance to keep herself standing. She began stroking her hair and mumbling to herself. The blood ran rapidly, and more rushed over the streets and slapped up against the body of the man, as if it were a dam. It eventually flowed over him and crashed down near Elise. She raised her arms in front of her and watched her tears dilute the blood on her stained palms and forearms. She tried stepping forward on her left foot and fell backwards due to the rush of blood from the street. She fell back and closed her eyes, expecting a wave of red liquid to envelop her body. She tightened her lips and plugged her nose so that the blood would not enter her lungs. Her body hit hard floor, and her exposed skin slapped down, causing an echo around her. Her back hit hard and knocked the wind out of her. She gasped for air like she had just come up suffocating under heavy water, and looked around. "Green walls," she said. "Linoleum floor?" There was no blood. Not on her, not on the floor, and not pouring from the street. She was back inside where she had started. She looked around the room and saw a note lying on the table near her. One that looked eerily familiar and alarming. She closed her eyes, then opened them abruptly, but the note was still there, and she tried it again. The note remained in its place and did not change, but when she had her eyes closed, the room was inverted in colors. She stood up and cautiously walked over to it. She felt a stabbing pain on her spine the moment when she decided to pick up the note, like a thick, dull needle. It did not bother her to a point of serious pain, so she decided to ignore it for now. She closed her eyes as she began to whisper out loud what the note said, and slowly made out the words. "Elise," she started, "I want you to know that you're the most pathetic, disgusting." She groped her back with a clutched hand and noticed that the more she read, the more pain she felt. There was a faint grinding noise, a machine that didn't quite work, that operated as she read the note. She continued, "Completely worthless human there is." She tried to stop the pain and hoped that it would go away if she were to open her eyes, but she found the task was impossible. "Why can't I open my eyes?" she thought, panicking. She noticed a shadow manifested in the left corner of her vision. She ignored it and kept reading. "Nobody wanted you. You are a mistake." At this point, every word felt like a knife plunging endlessly into her body. This figure jolted and ran behind her with ungainly legs. She tried to turn, but her entire body was paralyzed. Only her eyes and mouth could move. The machine noises came closer. "You're a waste of space, air, and matter." She coughed up thick blood that looked black, thick and dead. There was a heavy breath down her neck. The figure came closer into her vision, placing its tail body below the letter. It crouched down, and its head pointed towards her. She looked at it. Its top right half was missing, as well as the sockets that would hold its eyes. Its neck was full of holes, and its skin was a maroon crimson. Her back felt torn and broken, with a painful amount of weight pushing down her shoulders. "With love." She tried to breathe, and felt the lack of a heartbeat. The machine noises came from the figure who was now touching the paper, cutting its skin on it, and letting dark green fluid fall onto the paper, in Elise's hands. Her pupils tightened and shook at the signature. Her last breath made out the name. Elise. She fell to the floor and felt a numbing sensation as she hit the ground. She found that she could now force her eyes open. The noise, the letter, the pain, the thing, they were all gone. She swallowed, or at least tried to. She was hungry, thirsty, tired, and cold. There was a very high-pitched ringing that moved around the room. Elise slowly scooted her body to a corner and began to cry, feeling her stomach rumble in pain each time she inhaled. She heard a door open. There was a shadow that was alone, unfolding and stretching from a shape of dark mass. It took the silhouette of a human and walked in front of her. She tried to talk to it. She hadn't even finished saying, "Excuse me," before it vanished before her. The door opened again, this time with 3 silhouettes coming in. They made noises that sounded like a pre-recorded tape of children laughing. "Can you—" she said as they disappeared. The door flung open once more, releasing 3 dozen or so dark figures into the room. Elise stood up, tired of being ignored, and tried to touch one of the figure's shoulders. It morphed into a pile of dust that took the stance it was last in. She pushed it over and made a cloud of dust spread onto the floor of the room. Frustrated, she ran around the room and bumped or hit every moving thing in the room. Eventually, she found that she had done this to all the figures and looked them over while she was done. She jogged briskly around the room and pushing them all over, creating a dust bowl of air that was too thick to inhale. She coughed and wheezed in the thick, opaque air and fell backwards, feeling all the tension fall off her as she was dragged down with it. "Ma'am, are you all right? Please answer me," the officer said, lifting her from the bathtub. Elise coughed up some bloody water from the tub. She raised her arms in front of her face and saw the rows of cuts on her arms. The water had diluted the running blood that was pumped from her veins throughout her wrists. She looked over to the table in front of her, with the note still on it, where she had left it. Her entire body dripped bloody water into the carpet as 3 ambulance workers helped her into the vehicle. There were about 15 people crowding the street as the sirens went off, and Elise drifted off again to the sound of the wheels pounding the street. "Dear witnesses, these are my final words. I feel useless. I'm a waste of air, space, and matter. I'm pathetic and disgusting. Everyone thinks I'm completely worthless anyways. I am worthless. I am a mistake. Forever, with love, Elise F. Menderson."